Good evening. I am Jason Johnson in for Joy Reid. We now have 25 days to go. That's it. 25 days to go before the United States election. It is crunch time. Whatever metaphor you want to use, it's important, which is why Kamala Harris stumped in the battleground state of Arizona today with a message of UNITY.
It is important to look out for each other. It is important to understand that the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. I was raised in a community of folks who understood that when we stand together, when we look for commonality, that's when we thrive.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump rallied in the reliably blue state of Colorado, but in Aurora, a city he has demonized as overrun by migrant crime. That's not true, of course. He has called the Denver suburb a war zone taken over by Venezuelan gang members. Again, that's not true. But it wouldn't be MAGA, would it, if there weren't fear-mongering, lies, and racism?
And now America is known all throughout the world as occupied America. They call it occupied. We're being occupied by a criminal force. I will rescue Aurora and every town that has been invaded and conquered. These towns have been conquered. You can't live with these people. These are stone-cold killers. You could be walking down the street with your husband. You'll both be dead.
We saw a more humane response to policy issues relating to immigration last night when Vice President Harris courted Latino voters in a town hall hosted by Univision, reminding us that many people who come to this country, in fact, the majority, are not violent criminals, in case we needed that reminder. Most are hardworking and even young people, and oftentimes children.
They should not have to live in fear, but should have an ability to be on a pathway to earn their citizenship. So it is one of my priorities, and I've worked on this in terms of Dreamers for many, many years, and I'll continue to fight for them.
That is quite the contrast indeed. Joining me now to discuss is Rick Wilson, co-founder of the Lincoln Project and a former Republican strategist, and Fernand Amandi, Democratic pollster and MSNBC political analyst. So, Rick, I will start with you. I am of the mindset, and I tell people this all the time, I tell them in class, I tell them on the air, you don't just follow the polls, you follow what campaigns are doing. I'm seeing that Donald Trump is going to Madison Square Garden. He's going to Colorado, which is blue. He's going to Coachella. Is that because he's just confident he's going to win, so he's trying to run up the score in blue states, or these people don't know what they're doing? Because I'm confused by what I'm seeing as the campaign schedules of Trump over the last week and a half.
Never ascribe to guile and cleverness, what you can ascribe in Trump world to impulse and cupidity. This is a guy who is trying to make news for his base. He is not out trying to find new customers. Trump is stuck. He knows his number is somewhere between 47 and 43%, and that Kamala Harris's number is somewhere between 50 and 53%. He can't get up above that number right now. So he's trying to do something to break into the news cycle to get his base motivated again. They see him every day as a gibbering, drooling, sharding, weird, rambling guy on stage. They're not seeing the Trump they used to know. So he's trying to go out and do these things like the race rally in Aurora. He's trying to go out and do these things like the American Bund rally he wants to have in Madison Square Garden. And none of it's really working. It's not really taking off for him, but he's desperate to try to break the code. But Trump can't get new customers. He can't find people to expand his base. He's alienated all those folks. So he's now trying to maximize the crazy.
Fernand, last night, Vice President Harris did a town hall with Univision. I was impressed, actually, by the quality of the questions being asked. I was impressed by a lot of the answers that Vice President Harris gave. I thought it was actually one of her sort of best formats. But the story persists, and the numbers tend to suggest that Donald Trump is anywhere between 35 and 38% with Latino voters, which would be an all-time high for him and very high for most Republicans running nationally. Besides town halls, what does Harris need to do, or is this just a generational shift in Latino voters, and her campaign is going to have to lift up numbers amongst white seniors, African Americans, Asian Americans to make up for what might be losses in the Latino community?
Jason, I'm not so sure it's a generational shift as much as it just is the fact that, look, there has not been a relationship over the years with Kamala Harris and the Latino community outside, of course, of what she did in California, having been elected multiple times in the most Latino state in the country. What she has done, and we saw it last night in the Univision town hall again, is meet the moment again and again and again. And I think what her task and her campaign's task is here at the end is the closing message, reminding not just Latinos, but all Americans and all voters how much better off the country is because of her and Joe Biden having run this country. What is at stake if we turn it over to someone that General Milley today, Donald Trump's former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, called a fascist to the core, and how we can continue the progress of what lies ahead of us over the next 4 years if she is elected to a full term. But let me go back to something Rick said. He's absolutely right. I'm a veteran of 5 presidential campaigns. I've seen this movie before, and it's probably why I'm just a little bit calmer, especially when you look at the early vote numbers thus far. The Trump campaign is flailing. They're having to create an artificial reality world that does not exist in our land, in the real world, to try and create a sense that things are not what they seem. And it's all designed to kill turnout, because Rick is right. They've maxed out their support. They are now trying to just depress turnout on the Harris side. And the news right now is, Jason, it's just not working. All of the indicators thus far say it is not working.
Rick, I want to ask you this because it's a turnout election. All elections are turnout elections. But a question that I have really been paying attention to, and a number I've been paying attention to, are the amount of Republicans who might be about to cross over. We've seen poll after poll over the last week that, more than half of Nikki Haley voters are like, I'm not voting for this guy. We've got, Liz Cheney and other Republicans coming forward saying, I'm not voting for Trump, and I'm actually going to vote for Kamala Harris. Because those are two different things. It's one thing to say I'm not going to vote for Trump. That's Larry Hogan. But it's something else to say I'm actually going to vote for the Democrat. If you had to make a guess now, what are we looking at as far as erosion with Trump and Republican voters? It's 5%, 8%. How many Republicans may he have turned off in the last 4 years that are going to be voting for Harris across the country?
I think that number is going to be somewhere between 8 and 11%. That's my current back of the envelope math on it. I think it could actually go a little bit higher if Trump continues to have these public meltdowns and to have these physical and mental infirmities held out in front of Republicans. I think that we're going to see, look, we modeled this in 2020, and it was between 3 and 8%. This year, our model is between 7 and 15%. I'm going to call it somewhere in the middle of that. But you're going to see the largest crossover vote since Ronald Reagan in 1984. This is going to be a meaningful vote. I believe there are a lot of what we call shy Harris voters out there, Republicans who don't want to tell their friends and family they're done with Trump. They came out in droves to vote for Nikki Haley in the primary. They really wanted another option. Since the primary has ended, I don't think I would defy anyone to tell me they think that Trump is more sane, more rational, more coherent, less impaired, less demented. None of those things make any. There's no reason for those Haley voters to gravitate back to Trump if they've taken 30 seconds to look at this guy's performance on the stump in the last 6 months.
Fernand, I want to play you some sound very quickly from Kamala Harris talking about the late John McCain in Scottsdale, Arizona. Get your thoughts on the other side.
John McCain was on one side of the dais. I was on the other, horseshoe. And he's going after me. He's going after me. We're having some conversation. I think it was about one of the nominees. This is during President Trump's years. He's going after me. And I'm going back after him. I'm going back after him. And that was it. And this is what the public saw. And then I step onto the floor of the well of the Senate later that day. We had votes. And I passed by John McCain. And he looks at me and he says, "Kid, come over here. You're going to make a great senator."
I don't get moved by much, but that is a very sincere and authentic story. Like, anyone who knows John McCain, certainly Arizona voters, have to be sort of impressed and moved by that. Fernand, Arizona is going to be a really interesting state. Ruben Gallego is going to run laps around Kari Lake. That's pretty obvious. Many of us saw highlights from the debate last night. But Harris is tied or usually 1 or 2 points down to Trump in Arizona. Do you think the Gallego Senate race could end up pushing Harris over the line, or is this just going to be a photo finish at the end of Election Day?
I mean, I think the race will be close, but look, there becomes a math problem here for the Trump campaign. I don't see this famous, they used to call them Pumas during the Obama-Hillary race, the party unity, my behind types. I don't see this now unicorn of people that are going to vote Trump for president, but they're going to vote for Democrats up and down the ballot in these states. I mean, that's why Ruben Gallegos' overperformance here, I think, obviously helps Harris. But let's go back to that clip. I mean, that's going to go over phenomenally with the voters of Arizona, because, what is Kamala saying? She's saying, let's go back to Team America, folks. We can work together. We can be bipartisan, as opposed to the crazy fascist types on the other side.